14 of The Boy at the Back of the Class. Suddenly, with a huge roar, Ahmet ran straight at Brandon the bully. Like an angry lion, crashed into him with his head. Brandon the bully fell backwards and onto the floor, his legs swinging up in the air. We all gasped out loud, but Ahmet didn't stop there. He jumped on top, with his face red and patchy, and punched Brandon the bully as many times as he could, shouting something that none of us could understand. Someone behind cried us, "Fight!" and everyone in the playground ran to watch. And this was the most shocking of all. It wasn't really a fight. You could see two people at least to be fighting for it to be a fight. And Brandon, the bully, wasn't fighting back. Not at all. Not even for a second. Instead, he was holding his arms over his face as Ahmet continued punching and roaring and shouting at him with all his might. "Break it up now," shouted a voice as the crowd parted, and Mr. Irons and Mrs. Sanders came running through. But Ahmet wouldn't stop. He was like a machine that didn't have an off button, and he continued to punch and punch and punch just as hard and as fast as he could. "Right, young man," cried Mr. Irons, and grabbing him at the back of his jumper, Mr. Irons lifted Ahmet up off Brandon the bully, whilst Mrs. Sanders pulled Brandon the bully back to his feet. Everyone fell quiet. I don't know if that was because we were all wondering what was going to happen next, or because none of us could believe that Brandon the bully had actually been hurt. His face was bright red and his eyes looked watery, and there were tiny stones from the playground floor stuck on the sides of his cheek. With a horrible glint in his eye, Mr. Irons stared down at Ahmet and shouted, "What do you think you're doing, boy? Eh?" Ahmet stared angrily at the floor and didn't say anything. "Who started this?" shouted out Mrs. Sanders, who was so angry that she had forgotten to look over her glasses and was looking at everyone straight through them instead. I immediately pointed to Brandon the bully, and so did Tom and Josie and Michael. "Right, all of you with me now," ordered Mrs. Sanders, dragging Brandon the bully by the arms across the playground and into school. Mr. Irons flicked his hand and pointed to the doors, his nose whistling louder than it had ever whistled before. I followed Tom and Josie and Michael, and we all hung our heads and made our way through the crowds. Everyone stared at us, and then stared at Ahmet. His face was even redder than mine, and his lion eyes were so big and wet it looked as if they were drowning. He wiped away any angry tear and looked back over his shoulder. I looked back too and saw lots of bright pink spots all over the ground. The pomegranate had been smashed open, and its ruby red seeds had been crushed beneath everyone's feet. After, we told Mrs. Sanders all about what had happened. She gave me 50 lines to do for taking the pomegranate out into the playground, and said that Ahmet and Brandon the bully had to write lines every night for the rest of the week with Mr. Irons. We tried to tell her and Mrs. Khan that the fight wasn't Ahmet's fault, and that sometimes hitting someone when they're being horrible and taking something that's yours away from you can make you feel 100 times better than just telling a teacher ever would. Even 1,000,000 times better. But they just shook their heads and said that Ahmet should have never hit Brandon the bully. We didn't say anything after that because sometimes you can tell when grown-ups won't listen to you anymore. Usually they say, "That's an end of it," or "I've had my peas," or "That's that." But teachers always say, "That's all. You can leave now." After we left, I told Ahmet that I was sorry for getting him into trouble and that I would try and find another pomegranate for him. All he did was give me a nod and a thumbs up. I think it was his way of telling me not to worry, that being able to roar like a lion on top of a bully was worth doing lines for, even if it was hundreds of them, in a language he didn't know how to speak yet. As we all went home that afternoon, we talked about the big fight and how Ahmet was going to be famous because he was the first boy ever to have beaten up Brandon the bully. "You wait and see," said Tom. "Everyone's going to want to be his friend now, even the cool kids." I guess Tom was right, but it made me feel sad. If Ahmet made friends with the cool kids, that meant he wouldn't speak to us or play football with us anymore. There's laws that say cool kids can only ever hang out with other cool kids, and that they mustn't ever talk to us, except for when they're being put in a group with us by a teacher. I don't know who wrote that law, but Michael knows all about it. Yes, his mom must have told him. But it turned out Michael was wrong about the law because Ahmet never stopped being our friend. Not even after he became the most popular boy in school for beating up Brendan the bully. And not even when all the newspapers in the world made him the most famous refugee boy on the planet.